Hello, I hope you're having a lovely day or evening. Today, I am going to be responding to some questions from Kareem Hamdallah from my recent video, Writing for Games. And we'll be talking about, I think mostly these topics are going to be like, what does it take programming wise to get into the games industry? Which is something I love to talk about. So I'm a AAA game developer, but I've also done a lot of indie game work, and I moonlight as an indie game developer in the free time that my job provides me. Which sometimes it's not a lot. I think what's interesting about the different companies I've worked at is I've gotten to see a lot of different work cycles, and you know, like I'm currently working at id, which is under Microsoft, and they're primarily known for Doom, and their content release cycle is, they have these big releases, which I call holiday releases, where basically, you make a game and then you wait until it's going to be Christmas time, like Thanksgiving, and then that's when you release it. Versus another game that's like a live service, like Fortnite or Call of Duty. I've worked on both of those as well, and it's a very different content pipeline. Call of Duty, I'm referring to their battle royale because it's always releasing, so it's a very different vibe. And I think that the the constant content cycle of like a battle royale, like a live service game, I do feel like that's a little bit more like demanding of your time. Whereas I think what's nice about these releases, with the holiday releases, is you'll have like you'll have a crunch period for sure, but then you'll have maybe even vacation time. Like you'll be able to take a week or two off after that, and then there's also like a lull of a ramp up, right? And programming is often needed the whole time, but there's other industries and aspects of the job where, like, if you're a quality assurance, like there's some studios that will lay off their people during that like shallow period, and then it's frequent that in other, it depends on the studio, right? But it's quite common that like certain disciplines might transition to a different project at a certain part of a project's life cycle. For example, if you're done with the concept designs for a given project, your concept artists might start working on the next project. So in that sense, it's interesting how they kind of leapfrog. And it's also quite frequent that a large AAA studio is going to have connections in sort of a network where they might. Sorry, I don't know why I'm zoomed in here because I'm just talking crazy, but it's quite frequent that, like, for example, Doom is known for their really good engineers, and so they might help out another studio. Like some of the engine team might help out Bethesda's Starfield project, which is quite similar to how when I was working on Call of Duty, it's not infrequent for one of those many studios that make Call of Duty to collaborate, on the various titles that are being released. So all of that is to say that work isn't as crazy as it's been. So let's get to the first question here, which is, what is the level of programming in CS in general? Should I have to be good enough to get me into a AAA industry? Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and I think what's interesting about the AAA industry is the programming is quite specialized. So if you're applying to like Google or Facebook or Amazon, they have a very different process because these are like web companies where you might get some distinction of like a front end developer or a back end developer, but it's common. They'll also have something what's called full stack developer, where like you do both sides, but it's it's accessible for somebody to actually learn all those pieces of the puzzle. The games industry, like, there are full stack developers, right? In the games industry, that's not as often the case. Like, there's certainly people who do it all in like the indie sphere. When it comes to like a AAA environment, like there's no such thing as like a full stack gameplay engineer. There's nobody who does it all in the AAA space, right? With indie stuff, sure, right? I mean, there's always somebody who makes their own project and they do everything, right? But like at the level of specialization, like, or like a AAA role, you're not gonna find like a shader wizard who's also like really passionate and interested about like tools engineering and engine engineering, um, and tech art, right? It's just, there's just so many different disciplines, which is why it's probably worth asking, what kind of programmer do you want to be within the games industry? Because there are so many different kinds. There's people that probably, if you just want to break into the games industry, right? Because that's the question here. What do I need just to be good enough? Well, I'd say I think the programming is probably the easiest way to break into the games industry, because there's other roles like writing is like maybe one of the hardest to get into the games industry, because there's a lot of writers and the skills are like quite transferable to like other industries. So like a lot of writers who are applying to like movie gigs will like or TV show gigs, I should say, will like apply to like games writing as well. So here, let me go back to the full screen. So programming is one of the easiest ways to break into the games industry, because you don't have to have a strong backlog of work, which is fairly typical of artists and writers. You need to have really strong portfolios and stuff like that. It's very common for a programmer to actually apply to a job and get a test or an interview, even if he doesn't have a ton of like background experience, because at the end of the day, if he could pass the interview, then he or she is going to get hired, right? So it's a lot more where you can just kind of prove yourself, rather than having a lot of social credence and credit built up in order to break in. So on that note, which are the roles that are the easiest to get in? Probably the least sexy programming role on a AAA engine team is going to be an offshoot of quality assurance. Quality assurance is, of course, the easiest role to break into. It's fairly common for someone to get a quality assurance job without even a college degree. However, that is getting more and more difficult as the industry matures, because it's frequent now that many people are graduating from game specialized universities with bachelor's degrees in game design or certificates or what have you, and then they can't land game design jobs, so now those people are going into quality assurance. So I remember I actually sort of roomed with somebody when I was in LA working for the God of War team, and he was at an adjacent studio. Even though he had a game design degree, he couldn't land a game design job, so he was working as a quality assurance person. And so that's probably the easiest way to break into the games industry. But adjacent to that is something called quality assurance in test, which is where you're not manually testing the game with, button mashing and, trying to hack through the walls and stuff, but instead you're writing code that can more efficiently test different parts of the game that the other people are creating. And so that sort of engineer in test role is primarily the easiest way to get into the AAA game space, because it's a little bit less sexy and it is a little bit more adjacent rather than within the game studio. It's sometimes the case that a game studio will not have its own QA team at all. It'll third party source that out to a central hub. So they might not even work in the studio itself, but they're still certainly part of the product and the team of a AAA game studio. So it would be quality assurance and test. And then second to that, it would probably be a tools engineer. I think tools is probably the easiest to get started in, because it requires the least amount of subject area knowledge. Graphics programming is very knowledge heavy. You have to understand sometimes how to write languages that are completely unique to graphics programming, like shader code. And you need to understand, how certain processes work. And it is quite, I think, knowledge-based compared to tools engineering, where somebody who is maybe a good engineer at Google, making whatever they do now, like a little map or an email client, they may actually have really good transferable skills that they could start jumping into a tools engineering position. Whereas, it's impossible for that person to jump and make a purely lateral transition into graphics engineering. There's no way, right? They're certainly going to have to go down a peg, because the subject area knowledge is so specific. So tools engineering, I would say, is probably the second easiest programming job to get into. And it's actually been a way that a few notable people have been able to break into the industry. a brief story here. There's a guy named Neil Druckmann who's very well known for his work in the video game space. He was the writer for The Last of Us 1, and he's currently a creative director at Naughty Dog, which is sort of a premier first-party studio of PlayStation. And so he actually started out as a tools engineer. So he was a programmer, and that's how he got his foot in the door. And then I don't actually know his full story, but he eventually transitioned into a writing role, or a design role. And now he's the creative director, right? So it's definitely a path that some people can take in order to get, involved in the games industry. And I think tools engineering is a great place to start, even if tools engineering isn't necessarily what your dream job is, let's say. So I think that answers so let's say so those are the easiest, I'd say. And then the question is, how do you actually pass the test, right? What's the level of knowledge you need? I actually wrote a book on that subject. So let me pull that up. So if you go to mrventures.net, and then you go to other getting into game dev, and then so then you just scroll down here. This is the book itself. It's this web page. So you can go through this page. Sorry, this royalty-free synthwave is getting a little bit crazy for me. Let me skip to a more chill area. Okay, that's better. So you can go to this website and it'll give you questions like, what's the fastest way to tell if two sine floats are the same polarity? Like, that's an example question that you might get on a coding test or an in-person interview. And so if you can try to guess that, you can try to figure it out based on this information that I've given you, and then you can reveal solution to quiz yourself. So this is a book that it's an interactive book, let's say, that I'm in the process of writing, and this is probably one of the best ways to test your skills and see if you'd be able to pass the test. But it's not complete yet, and if you click this link, you will go into a Google, and then you click access, you'll go into a Google Drive document that has the full text, right? Because it's a lot of information here. And this is sort of meant as an addendum to somebody who already knows how to program. And if you want to, so I think there's actually example questions here. Let me see if there's example questions. Example questions, maybe something like that. I do have like practice questions here. I don't know where it is though. It's probably like at the end. Here we go, review questions. So I would say go through this list of review questions and see how many can you do. Do you know what the cross product is? How would you obtain a point on a plane, right? All of this like geometry is like really fundamental, or trigonometry is like really fundamental to a lot of these coding interviews, particularly for the kind of programming which I do, which is called gameplay engineering, which has a lot of maths involved. So that's something to be mindful of if that's the kind of work that you want to do. And as I said before, there's a lot of different kinds of engineering, so you got to pick which one you're passionate about and lean towards it. So did that answer the question? Oh yeah, so as I was saying, this is an addendum to another book, a really good book called Cracking the Coding Interview. Check it out. It's by Jane McDonnell, I think, or McDougall, something. Gail McDonnell, that's her name. So if you check out this book, it's fantastic. It's one of the best books to train for any interview, even outside of the gaming space. If you want to work for like Google or Facebook or something like that, Meta, whatever it's called, right? Then this is the kind of book that'll help you crack the code, right? Yeah. So that's the first question answered. The second question: I'm struggling a lot with software architecture while designing game engine or game from scratch. What should I do to overcome this? Well, that's a great question, and I think when it comes to engine development or software architecture, that's probably one of the hardest parts of game development. So how would we overcome this? Well, first you should know that, as I said, there's a lot of different kinds of programming. So if you find that engine development or the sort of deep software architecture is not resonating with you, then that doesn't necessarily have to be your path into the games industry. You don't have to specialize in that. Not everybody on a game development team knows how to create an engine. But if you did want to create an engine, how would you go about this? I would say the number one learning resource is going to be looking at existing engines and understand how they function. So I highly recommend checking out the Unreal Engine. It's more common. I've taught students in the past, and it's frequently the students' engine of choice to use an engine called the Unity engine. Students love the Unity engine because C# is obviously a lot more accessible than C++. However, Unity has this really pernicious system where you can't actually edit the engine code. And if you want to learn how an engine works, it's essential that you have visibility into that code and understand the full picture of how everything fits together, right? Because in a AAA studio, right, it would be unacceptable to give an engineer like even when Unity has is a third-party engine for like an actual game studio, they will acquire a developer license so that they can look at the Unity source code so that they can fix shit, right? Because if you use Unity, you know it's fucking broken half the time. There's a lot of problems with it. So, and you can't fix it, right? Which is what's so, it's what pisses people off about Unity. There's other engines where you can see the underlying code and you can go in there, step through everything and understand how it works. And so for that reason, I would highly recommend an engine where you have that visibility. So the number one engine that comes to mind is the Unreal Engine, Unreal Engine 4, or now Unreal Engine 5. That's a great engine for you to download, go into the code and understand how it's actually functioning under the hood. That's without a doubt, I think, the best way to learn. Just start building something and seeing how the pieces come together. But of course, it might be a little bit like throwing yourself into the ocean without knowing how to swim, to just jump into an engine and try to figure it out. So there's a number of other resources that I think are really useful to start learning how an engine comes together. So at a very basic level, there's a book called Game Engine Architecture, which I don't recommend this book. I don't think it's very good, frankly, but everybody always recommends it. And Jason Gregory is a brilliant engineer. He is a fundamental, engineer within the Naughty Dog engine, which we were just talking about recently, the Last of Us team. But I don't think he's a very good author. I think he fails to explain a lot of stuff, but he does cover a lot of the topics that you might want to learn. So if you're just interested in sort of introducing yourself to some of these concepts, I think this could be a really good book. I mean, it's on my shelf, right? I own the book. I don't think it's shit. But I think it's not very good at actually explaining the stuff it talks about. So it's like, this is a good book for you to understand some of the broad topics. And then you can go online and research and find other books that are better at like actually zooming in and understanding the fundamentals of how things work, I should say. There's another book, which I do recommend. I think it's a very good book. It's called Real-Time Collision Detection, but I often just call it the Orange Book because it has a very, very identifiable front page. It's called the Real-Time Collision Detection by Christopher Erickson. This is previously the technical director, maybe not technical director. He was previously a fundamental engine person on the studio Sony Santa Monica, which is the sister studio of Naughty Dog. Funny enough, right? These guys in California seem to be passionate about teaching people how to do things. So isn't that wonderful? And I guess that's at PlayStation specifically. But he doesn't work there anymore. He quit once upon a time. And it's funny because, when I was working at Sony Santa Monica, a friend of mine who I was working with, he said, I actually wanted to go to the studio because I wanted to work with this guy specifically because I was so impressed by this book. And that actually inspired me. So I went home, I bought the book, I read it, and it's amazing. It's a really good book. So I highly recommend this book for understanding specifically, like this is a little bit of what I'm talking about, right? It's like this book is easily the density. It's far more dense than game engine architecture, but it's maybe like half the size. And it's just one of many, many topics within game engine architecture. So like GEA is like, it's an ambitious book, right? And it's trying to explore everything, but you might find a certain topic and then you go deep on it, right? And like Real-Time Collision Detection is an actually competent book that goes deep on one specific section. So I think learning from the books is a great resource. I highly recommend checking this out. There's another set of books I'd love to recommend to you, and they are called the Black Books. And there's actually one on Doom, which is that's the studio that I work at. So this guy, Fabian Sanglard, is that right? Or is it Sanglard? I'm not sure. But he created these books called the Black Books on game engines. And this is going to be a great resource for you if you're interested in game engine architecture, because it actually goes to existing
engines, and it explains how they made it. So obviously, there's a little bit of a historical angle too, because Doom certainly was not released recently. I think it was like 1996. So it's a little bit dated, right? But a lot of the principles that are in this book are present still today. I remember when I was working on Call of Duty and I was doing multiplayer code, I was actually referred to his book on Quake 2 because the like the multiplayer engine architecture is like equivalent to the kind that's still being used today for modern AAA games like Call of Duty. So it's hard to understate how much work has gone into these books and actually how valuable they could be. This is not a book I've read, but I've read parts of it, let's say, and I do recommend it. I found it quite informative. So I think that's everything I have to recommend to you with respect to that. Does that answer your question? I think it does. I would also say one thing to understand is that a game engine is a tool for a very specific role. It's very uncommon to have a game engine that can be used for any other game than the one it was explicitly built for, right? If you were trying to do Call of Duty in the God of War engine, that would be impossible, right? It doesn't support it, right? And increasingly, these engines are getting more and more generic, right? Because now there's something like the Unity engine or the Unreal engine, which could be used for multiple different games. That kind of thing didn't really exist like a decade ago. This is like kind of a new concept, these sort of third-party engines. But that's something to understand because it's built on years and years and years of work from people who have built many different specialized engines. So if you're building a game engine, like, don't be overly ambitious to say this is going to work for like every single game. Make it work for your game and then extend, add a feature, add another feature, and then let it grow organically. I think that's the best way to approach it because, an engine is specialized. You're never going to get the best quality with an engine that can do every single game, right? Unity engine is never going to be the best engine to use for like a AAA game. Like the God of War engine is its own engine because they want to push the frame rate as high as like physically possible, right? And there's a really sad thing going on in our industry right now where like the engine developers are getting collated, right? These big companies, Unity and Unreal, are scooping up a lot of these engineers. And there was some recent news, you may have heard about it. It was really devastating for like the game engine community, which is that CD Projekt Red, which had created The Witcher and Cyberpunk with a really awesome engine of its own, is now switching over to, I believe, the Unreal Engine. So that means that all those like engine engineers are no longer creating their own engine, and it's actually a really bad thing for our industry because it's reducing diversity within the space. So we'll see what happens, but it's a little bit scary. Okay, next question. The level of math and physics. I think physics is not required as math. Right, I understand what you're saying. So you want to understand, like, how do I get good at the kind of math that they're going to ask me on an interview question, or the kind of math that I'm going to need in the day-to-day of being a game programmer? Well, again, it depends on the kind of programmer you are, but if you're going to do something like me, like gameplay, which I was saying earlier is very math-heavy, then I think my book here is really going to be the best resource I know of. Hey, man, if I thought there was a better book to refer you to, I would. I think Real-Time Collision Detection by Christopher Erickson is probably a really good book to go to for maths, but it's not, I think, geared towards the interview. So I still think my book's going to be a better fit for you, but I would say check out his as well. So a little bit of a balance there, but I think those are going to be the best resources. I love how if I pull up this book, my whole face becomes orange. It's so a garish, I think is the word. Like it's a garish color. But that's compelling, isn't it? So then the next question is resources for studying. I think I've given you those. If I have a fair knowledge in C++ and math and physics, allowing me to create a simple 2D or even a small 3D game from scratch, that is my level now. Where should I go? Okay, that makes sense. So let's say you're somebody who has followed a bunch of tutorials on YouTube and you've created a Unreal Engine 4 project and you followed the tutorials, and you followed the Unity tutorials, and now you've created some basic games, right? So, I mean, the first thing you want to do is create some basic games and put them on your website. So, for example, I'll go over here to here, like I've got a bunch of just basic games that I've made, and I put them on my website, like this little game over here. My website's terrible, man. Everything's loading so slow. So make a bunch of little games, add a little demo like this. I think that's a helpful learning tool. But the question is now, you've made a bunch of these games. What do you do next? Here's the answer. First, pick a studio that you want to work at. So for example, let's say you want to work at the studio Sony Santa Monica, known for their critically acclaimed Game of the Year God of War remake, the game that just came out, right? And they have the upcoming God of War Ragnarok coming out. Let's say you want to work there. What you're going to do next is you're going to pick an aspect of that game that you think is really compelling as an engineer. So for example, the most common one I've seen is, for that game in particular, is they'll choose the mechanic where the Kratos, the main character in that game, can throw an axe, and then it will come back to him, hitting any enemies along the way. So it actually will curve the path of the axe in order to hit enemies. And what you do is you recreate that in your game engine. So Kratos axe throw recreation. Axe throw in Unreal Engine. Okay, so you do something like this. And this is an example of somebody who did it in a half-hour explanation. Let's see what they came up with. Is there a demo at the end here? Let's check it out. It's pretty cool. All right, so in like half an hour, you can make a little something like this, and then you can pull it back. And obviously, the impressive part of the axe throw mechanic is that it will go around obstacles, which it looks like it can do there, but that it will hit enemies along the way. So it doesn't look like he's actually done that. So I think this guy may have missed the memo a little bit. So that's the important part that you want. So make sure you do that as well. Music's getting a little crazy. Get it to a little chill. So that's what you do. You go to these games that the studio you're applying to has made, recreate their iconic and classic mechanics, and build a little demo of that. Like make some code in a game engine that could foreseeably just be dropped right into an actual game of theirs. And then they'll say, oh wow, he's doing work at the level and quality of a game that we've made. He'd be a great fit for the team. So that's really the best way for you to do it. And that is actually like information that is true for like any discipline you're applying to. If you're a concept artist, they want you to draw concepts that are in line with the kind of concept work that they do for their games. So if your portfolio is like all comic book stuff, then they're not going to be happy, right? They're going to want to see you do art that's actually for the kind of video games that they make. And it's the same kind of thing with programming. So for example, if you're an engine programmer, then you might go to, you might go to a video like this where Elon Ruskin, one of my favorite programmers of all time, is he's explaining how he made a content-aware AI speech engine. And so what you might do is you might implement this engine in a little demo game. And of course you're an engine engineer, right? So it doesn't have to look as sexy, but it'd be nice if it does. Download something from the asset store or the marketplace in order to make it look nice. And then you can just use that as sort of a demo of this really cool tech that you built. So I think that's another way, right? And try to build the engine and the tools and whatever it is that is relevant to the actual game studio you're applying for. So that's my answer for that. Okay. What's the next question we have here? How working as game engineer in game industry be like? What I do every day and challenges I face? Well, it depends on the kind of engineer you are, of course. There's certain roles where it's very collaborative and you have to work with designers every day or artists every day and help them. There's other roles where you don't help people. You are independent and you're known as like a wizard and you're just asked to bring a lot of cool visual content to the table where it's not really supporting another team. In fact, you might have teams that support you. So there's a lot of different roles. I can speak to my own experience. Traditionally I'm a gameplay engineer, but I've actually just transitioned because that's what the team needed to become an AI engineer. So that's been something I've been learning a little bit more of. But really my passion is gameplay engineering. And even though I guess I'm not one technically anymore. But you know, at heart, I'm a gameplay engineer. I'll say once a gameplay engineer, always a gameplay engineer, if that's what you'd like. And so what do I do as a gameplay engineer? Well, a gameplay engineer, my experience, is definitely one of those more supportive roles. So I'm usually not the hero. Usually I'm somebody who will help other teams display really awesome content. So I might work with a designer who has a cool idea for a quest in a game. And what I'll do is I'll work with him to implement the coding features that are necessary in order for him to get those cool ideas actually into the game and implemented. So if you'd like to know about some work that I did, I can refer you to a video I did on my channel for that. So I have a video where I talk about what it was like to work on Fortnite. You can click this one. This is the Fortnite video. I have a video. This is somebody else who worked at Epic Games. What else do I have? Let me see my videos. I have one where I worked on God of War. I don't know where that one is. I think it's called Intern of War. Let me see where that Intern of War Happy Ventures. Yeah, okay, so if you click this one, Intern of War, this is what it was like to work at Sony Santa Monica. And then this video, right under it, the third one, I worked on COD Warzone. That video talks about what it was like to work on Call of Duty Warzone. And you'll notice from these videos, it's all very different because what the engineer actually does in the day-to-day is like quite specific to the studio and the game and the role. So there's a lot of variance there. But primarily, it's coding. As you might imagine, right? It's primarily just writing computer code. And I had a friend of mine who studied computer science in university, and we were in our first course as computer programmers, and she said to me, "Wow, is this really what it's going to be like? Am I just going to spend my whole day in front of a computer? I hate that." You know, she was really passionate about talking to other people and being in an industry and a role where she could, where she was communicating on the day-to-day. And programming primarily isn't that. There's a lot of very collaborative programming roles, but at the end of the day, compared to other jobs, it's not as collaborative as other teams, as other roles. So I would say it's a lot of being alone. It's a lot of sitting at the computer. And it's a lot of thinking, you know. People who might like programming are the kind of people who might enjoy editing essays. Someone who's like an editor, you know, that this kind of thing, or solving math problems. That might be the same kind of person who enjoys programming. So that's mostly what it is. It's mostly just sitting down and typing and thinking, and every now and then meeting with people and discussing sort of broad ideas. And a lot of reading too, a lot of reading code, particularly if you're in a AAA environment where you're working within a large code engine. One of the most important skills for an engineer to learn, particularly a gameplay or engine engineer, is what I would call code surfing, which is where you jump into a foreign code base. And of course, at first you'd have to learn how to swim, right? But eventually you'll be able to surf, where you can jump between different sections of the code base, pop into a file you've never read before, and sort of into it, understand what's going on there. So I'd say that's kind of what it feels like the day-to-day. And that's it. So those are my thoughts on to answer your questions. I hope they did. If you have more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section, or hit subscribe if you'd like more videos like this, and I'll catch you in the next one. Good luck in your career. I hope you land the job of your dreams.